Hey everybody, welcome back. Razirek here with another tutorial in our Roblox Studio Introductory Series. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. This series is geared toward players who are finding that the existing tutorials out there have a starting point that's a little bit more advanced than what they might like. And at the same time, these videos go much more in depth into teaching some of the concepts and things like that, as opposed to just a quick glazing over like a lot of tutorials do. Um, so if you are not yet a subscriber, I welcome you to please go ahead and subscribe and stay tuned to all of our upcoming videos and things that'll be rolling out here very shortly. We've got scripting coming up and a lot of advanced techniques that are going to be getting introduced very, very soon. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and kick this video off by covering some of the effects that we have not touched on yet. In previous videos we did, like with the campfire, we showed fire and smoke and lighting and things like that. And I know I made some brief mention of some of the other effects. Today we're going to get into what those effects do. And one thing that's going to be very different from other videos that I've done is I'm not going to be building anything in this. Instead, I'm really going to just highlight the effects and how to use them and do so in a very, very basic way. And I'm going to leave all the creativity up to you guys in terms of how you apply it and what you apply it to. So I'm just going to be working from a basic part today. So I'm going to create a block. And then within this block, I'm going to add some sparkles. Now, sparkles is a form of particle emitter that is already preset with certain properties, much like the fire emitter and the smoke emitter and stuff like that, and really doesn't allow you to change a whole lot. Now, there are still some uses for it. I've seen them being used in tycoon games where a part comes off of the conveyor and lands on a collector and you get a little sparkle effect coming off of it. I've seen them used in magic wands and various weapons like that. Power-ups in a game, if you're trying to call attention to them and give a little bit of visual cue that they're there. Sparkles are pretty handy. They don't take much effort to place and configure and all of that. And really the only property that you have control over is the color of them. So very minimal amount of work to put them in place and start using them. And you'll see if we change this color, the particles are affected here. Now, a particle is nothing more than a non-physical texture. So if we run through this, we're not going to bump into anything other than part itself. These things are not going to be affected by us or other parts. They'll just pass right through objects and not be affected whatsoever. Now, this particular emitter comes out from all directions except for from the bottom. So you can picture a half circle. If you were to take a sphere and cut it in half, the remaining area on top here is the spread of the emission here. And that's really the only thing that you can control on particles. So they do produce a pretty nice visual effect, but they're not very customizable at all. I'm going to delete that. And we're going to take a look at the particle emitter itself now. Oops, select your part first. There we are. So now right off the bat you'll notice it's very, very different than the sparkles. First of all, it's a very tightly controlled spread here, just covering really just the top of our part, going straight up, no variation in angle or anything like that. The particles live for much, much longer, and they're much slower. And you'll see that there's a little bit of a staggered disappearing act that they're doing here. And what this is called the life of the particle. So you could think of them as being born here and dying here. And their lifespan is determined by a couple of properties that we'll look at in just a moment here. But the emitter offers us much more control than our other effects did. Of course, we still have our color. But now we have some new properties here that control how bright these textures are, these particles. And that's done in two ways. So there's an internal light source and external light sources. Light emission is an internal light source. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to change our lighting, make it nice and dark here. Let's do 2130. And you can see right now they're very, very dim. If we wanted these particles to glow on their own, we can do so by changing the light emission value. And this is a 0 to 1 value, and you can set it to any decimal in between, 1 being fully bright. Now you can see they are glowing on their own. And if I decrease this, they get dimmer. But now the light source is not going to affect anything else around them. So this part here is completely unchanged regardless of the value that we have set here. I'm going to set this back to 0. I'm going to drop another part in the world. I'm going to bring it nice and close. And inside this part, I'm going to add a point light. Let's increase the brightness to 3 and increase our range to 24. Now you can see these particles here got much brighter. As we look up, they start to dim here, and we can really see that difference if we decrease our range. Now you see these got much dimmer. If we tone our brightness level down further and decrease the range to half of that, you'll see much more dimming is apparent. So the point light within this part is affecting the particles based on this light influence value. If I bring this back up to 3 and back up to 24, they're nice and bright here. If I come over here and I bring light influence down, it's difficult to see. If you look really closely, you can see that there is some variation in the brightness. You got to really look close. But it's helping to determine how these particles respond to the external light source. I'm going to get rid of this part. Change our time back. The next thing we have is size. So by default they have a size of 1, and that's the size of the individual particles themselves. If I set this to 0.5, we get much smaller ones. Likewise, if I set it larger, they get much bigger. And we could really go extreme with it if we really, really wanted to. Create some rather unique effects. And as mentioned, a particle is really nothing more than a non-physical texture. And in this case, it's using a default texture called Sparkle's Main, which is internal to Roblox. We can replace that with any texture we want. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to come to my View panel here and open up the toolbox. Now, we can take another texture here, and let's say you had a VIP area, for instance. This would be a good use here, and you wanted to draw attention to it. We could use a particle emitter to help do that. So I'm going to click on VIP. I'm going to click on the face here, and that's going to apply that texture to that, or that decal, I'm sorry, to that surface of the part. And the reason I did that is because all we want is this ID value right here. So if we come in here and we grab this set of numbers, we copy that. We can delete our decal now. Come into the particle emitter, and in our texture property, we can paste that in. And now we have our VIP decal being emitted. Now you'll notice that the area surrounding the letters here is solid white. This is a non-transparent decal. So the background is there. We can emit transparent decals as well. If we open our toolbox back up, let's say we wanted shiny teeth. Same thing, I'm going to click on that and click on our surface here. Copy this ID and apply it here. Now you can see that the transparency is maintained. And it really comes down to how that texture was created, whether or not it was a transparent texture. One thing to note is that the textures are going to be affected by your color value. One way to think about this would be, let's say you have a drawing on a piece of paper, and you take a piece of transparent film that's colored, and you lay it over top of that image. The image underneath is going to take on that color change. It's going to be most apparent in lighter areas, and especially white. Darker areas, and especially black, are not going to be affected by the color change. And the same thing applies here. So if I change this, let's say we want pink. Now you'll notice that the teeth have changed to pink. The eyes and eyebrows aren't affected, neither are the outlines, because they're black. And the black is going to show through that color change, just like they would if you were to lay that transparent film over top of it. And we can set this to whatever color we want, and it'll just overlay that right on top. Another thing we can do is change our transparency here, and again this is a 0 to 1 value, 1 being completely invisible, which doesn't make much sense in a particle emitter. If you're going to emit them, they should be at least somewhat visible. And we can set 0.5, and they're 50% transparent, just as with anything else. Z offset is a rather advanced property that you're probably not going to find yourself making much use of for a typical use of a particle emitter. There are some cases where it's appropriate, but what this determines is the distance from the screen where the rendering of these particles becomes blocked. And that could be used for a few different reasons. Let's say we have some overlaying particles or something like that, and when we reach a certain point we want the closer particles to no longer be seen or whatever. I mean, there's a few cases where this can come in handy, and I'm going to show you what that does. If I back the screen up here and we set this to 10. Now, when my screen gets 10 studs away from the particles, their rendering gets blocked. If I increase this value to 25, now it's much more apparent. So they don't start becoming visible until they've exited this 25 stud radius around the screen. A couple other things here. So we have the particles being emitted vertically, and they're just sort of free-flowing away. They're not affected by gravity or air resistance or anything like that. There's no friction in their way, so they're just kind of having the smooth path from start to end, not being interfered by anything else. Drag is one way to affect that. If I set this fully on to 5, you'll see they're stopping almost as soon as they emit. And you could almost think of this as maybe trying to drive through thick mud or cement, wet cement maybe, it's going to slow your vehicle to a halt. And that's kind of what's going on here. So they're trying to make it to the end point, but they're just getting stuck along the way. And you can see as they start moving through this, they slow down until they come to a stop. And that's much more apparent if I decrease this. So you can see here, they start out nice and fast, and the further along they get, the slower they go until they finally stop. So it's just adding some resistance to it. There's different cases where you may want to use this. Lock to part is a property that gets set. It's a little hard to explain here, but the origin of the particles being bound to the part here, and you can see what's going on. Let me turn that back off and show you. So when the particles are released, they're completely free on their own. So once they leave the part, they're occupying their own position, and they'll just keep on cruising along vertically until they reach the end of their life. So you'll see here, they just keep moving vertically. Locking to the part, they now keep a relationship with that part, and they're no longer this free-flowing thing. Oh, you know what? One thing that we skipped right over, I apologize for that, acceleration. So we have no other velocity being applied to this from any other angle, just strictly vertically. We can change that. So if we look at our part, we can see our axes. We have X, Y, and Z. So if we wanted it to go off to the side, we can apply some acceleration to the x-axis. So I'm going to set that to 5 so you can see that. So now you see it's like wind is blowing it along that axis. We can go diagonally with it as well by applying that velocity to both x and z. And now we already have some influence on the y-axis, but we can increase that if we want to. We can bump this up to 30 and just send them skyrocketing. And we can also, if we really wanted to, apply negative values as well. We can change the face of the part that they're emitting from. So right now it's top. We can go front, back. We can change which surface they're coming out of. And if you remember, I was mentioning that there is a min and max life for these, which is controlled here. Minimum is the earliest amount of time that these will remain visible until they disappear. Maximum is the longest amount of time that they'll be allowed to remain visible. So if I come here and I change this to 0.5, you're going to notice that they're going to start disappearing much, much sooner. If we watch close, they're disappearing here. And if I decrease this one to 2.5, now our max lifetime, as soon as the old particles fade away, the max lifetime here is much shorter. So we've decreased the overall distance that they're allowed to travel. Rate is the number of particles that get emitted over a period of time, currently set to 20. We can decrease this to 5 to show the difference here. Or we can create a really dense cloud of particles by increasing that value. I'm going to set these values back to the defaults. Sorry. Now, they're all being created at a uniform rotation. They're not being turned at all, they're just coming straight out exactly as the texture was designed. We can change that up, and we can say we want these to be allowed to be upside down or any angle in between. And we can also tell it to rotate them as they move as well. And again, we have a min and max value here. I'm going to leave min at 0, so we have some that don't rotate at all. And max, I'm going to set, let's go 30. And you'll see we have some that are actually spinning as they move. If you want to see that better, we can set both values equal, so now they are all spinning. And you'll see as they travel, they're rotating. We have the same thing for min and max speed. If I set min to 1, we'll have some that are very, very slow. Or we can create some that are very fast. And then spread angle allows you to apply two other axes that will be affecting the angle at which these get generated. So right now they're both set to 0. If we set them to 60, for instance, you'll see we now have some coming at the camera and away. So we've increased our spread here. We can do the same on our other axis as well. So now we have more of a cone shape that they're being emitted from. Now the last thing that I'm going to cover in this particular video is trails. Trails are a little bit unique in how they're placed, and you've seen these in other games, I'm sure. I'm going to show you exactly what they are and what they do. If I come in here and I apply a trail to this part, it's not going to do anything at all. And the reason for that is because trails need to be attached to special parts called attachments that live on other parts. And what it does is it creates a start and an end point for the effect. If I come in here to the part, I go to create and I select attachment, I'm going to place one here and one over here. Now if I come to my trail, I'm going to select attachment 0 and click on our first attachment, and then attachment 1 and click on the other one. So now this trail has been attached to the space in between these 2 points. And that's the key to making these work. I've seen a lot of people complain, oh, the trails don't work, yada yada yada. It's because of the way that they're attached. And let me show you what trails do. First of all, let's change the color here to something very obvious. We'll say red. And I'm going to run this. I'm going to grab my move tool. And we're going to drag this part. Now if you remember, it's attached from here to here. So now as I move the part, the distance in between that leaves behind this trail. And there's a few other properties here that we'll take a look at. I actually won't stop the server here. Light emission, just like in the case of our sparkles, this just gives sort of an internal glow. Texture is currently blank. I'm going to set this back to 1 for this demonstration here. We're going to go to our View tab, open up our toolbox. Let's search for paw print. Let's find, well, we have that one. Let's try footprints. Well, not really finding what I want, so we'll just go ahead and stick with this one here. This isn't bad. I'm going to select this, pick a surface, grab the ID, just like we did before, and delete the decal. I'm going to come back into Trail and I'm going to paste this here. So now when we move our part, now it's leaving behind a paw print. Obviously this is not an ideal means of leaving prints behind when you walk through snow and mud and things like that. This is not how your prints behave. And that's another property that we have control over here. And that's texture mode. So right now it's set to stretch. I'm going to set this to static. We're going to leave texture length at 1, so it's our default size. We can adjust this to whatever we want it to be. We can do half size, double, whatever. But now with this being set to static, you're going to see that it's creating copies of that texture. And if you'll notice, they begin where the trail touches the part, and then they kind of disappear. We can take a reverse approach and say wrap, and it's going to begin from where the part originates from, as you see here. If I do it slower, you can see that the textures are moving, and they're actually coming out of an invisible space here and coming to meet the part. Whereas with static, it's the opposite. They're coming out of the part, and you're not seeing anything moving at the origin point here. And we can also set the lifetime, how long it is before they disappear. And then min length just determines the minimum allowable size for the textures that are displayed. That about covers it for our part attached special effects here. There is another really cool one that is not yet landed yet, but I'm excited for, and that's beam. So you will find that in your studio. However, it doesn't yet work, and the moment that that does become enabled, I will release a new video and show that. And explosions we're not going to get into until we start scripting. For obvious reasons, we want to be able to trigger those explosions so that you can see the effect. So for right now, that's going to cover this particular video. We will get into a few additional special effects that can be applied in an upcoming video. But for right now, I'm going to leave you to that. I would love to see some of the stuff that you are able to come up with, some ideas on how you can apply some of these effects and things. If you do come up with anything cool, please by all means share it with me. I'd love to see it. If you have any questions or comments or feedback, drop them below the video here. Be sure to like and subscribe. And if you are following along with our release schedule here, I've been pushing out close to a video a day now. Make sure that you turn that little notification bell on so that you are aware the moment that a new video gets published and can jump in and follow along with us. So, thank you guys so much for your time. I hope you've learned a lot and gained a lot from these videos. There's going to be much more coming. I'm looking forward to getting into our next series, which is going to start diving into scripting. We're going to start doing some really, really cool things here pretty soon. So until then, happy building. Take care, everybody.